Imagine waking up tomorrow, knowing you are allowed to speak only once for the entire day. One sentence, one moment where your voice can be heard. After that, silence, until the next morning. Every word would matter. Every pause would carry weight. Every conversation would have to be carefully chosen. At first, it sounds like an interesting challenge, but when you begin to imagine the reality, the idea becomes deeply unsettling. Human life is built on constant communication. We speak to express needs, emotions, warnings, love, disagreement, humor, and identity. Limiting speech to a single moment per day would radically reshape how people think, behave, and relate to one another. The immediate shock to daily life. The first impact would be practical chaos. Modern life depends on continuous verbal interaction. Ordering food, asking for directions, negotiating at work, resolving conflicts, or even responding to emergencies would become incredibly difficult. People would have to plan their single spoken moment with extreme care. Many would likely save their daily sentence for emergencies. What if something goes wrong later in the day? What if someone needs help? This hesitation alone would cause constant anxiety, turning silence into a heavy psychological burden rather than a peaceful state. Daily routines would slow dramatically. Simple misunderstandings that could be resolved in seconds with speech would stretch into long, frustrating exchanges through gestures, writing, or digital communication. Silence would become the default, not the exception. Communication would become strategic. Speech would no longer be casual. It would be strategic. People would rehearse their one sentence over and over, refining wording to maximize clarity and impact. Should you use your words to express love, ask a crucial question, defend yourself, or give instructions? Conversations would no longer flow naturally. Instead, communication would resemble a high-stakes game where timing and precision matter more than spontaneity. One poorly chosen sentence could ruin relationships, careers, or even lives. Written language would dominate. Notes, text messages, symbols, and body language would become essential. Those skilled in writing or visual communication would gain an advantage, while others might struggle to be understood at all. Emotional expression would change. Speech is one of the primary ways humans express emotion. Without it, emotional life would become more restrained and internalized. Anger might simmer longer. Joy might go unshared. Grief could become isolating. When people finally use their one daily sentence, emotions might erupt with overwhelming intensity. A single spoken phrase could carry days' worth of suppressed feelings. Arguments could become explosive, while declarations of love might feel monumental and irreversible. At the same time, people might become more emotionally observant. Tone of voice would matter more than ever, because it happens only once. Facial expressions, gestures, and actions would take on greater importance as substitutes for spoken emotion. Relationships would be transformed. Romantic relationships would face enormous strain. Couples rely on constant verbal reassurance, negotiation, and conflict resolution. With only one spoken sentence per day, misunderstandings could linger for hours or days. At the same time, spoken words might become deeply meaningful. Saying "I love you" would no longer be routine. It would be a powerful, deliberate choice. Silence itself might become a language, communicating trust, patience, or resentment depending on context. Friendships would likely change as well. Some might fade due to the effort required to maintain them. Others could grow stronger, built on shared understanding and nonverbal connection rather than constant conversation. Families would adapt in complex ways. Parents would struggle to guide children verbally, while children might grow up highly attuned to nonverbal cues. Discipline, affection, and teaching would rely heavily on actions rather than words. Power, control, and inequality. A world with limited speech would quickly develop new power structures. Those who control written platforms, translation systems, or visual communication tools would hold immense influence. Governments and institutions might regulate when and how people can use their one spoken moment. Public speaking would become one of the most powerful acts imaginable. A leader's single daily sentence could shape public opinion, inspire movements, or spark conflict. Speech would no longer be abundant. It would be scarce, and scarcity creates value. Inequality would also deepen. People with disabilities affecting writing or movement could be severely disadvantaged. Access to communication tools would become a basic necessity, potentially controlled or restricted by authorities, conflict, and violence. Limiting speech could reduce some forms of verbal abuse or impulsive conflict. Without constant talking, people might pause more before acting. However, suppressed frustration could lead to increased physical aggression or emotional withdrawal. When people cannot speak freely, misunderstandings escalate. Small conflicts that could have been diffused with conversation might spiral into resentment or violence. Silence does not always bring peace. Sometimes it amplifies tension. Legal systems would be forced to adapt. Testimony, trials, and negotiations would rely heavily on written records, raising questions about fairness, interpretation, and access. Culture, art, and meaning. Art and culture would change dramatically. Music, visual art, dance, and performance would flourish as alternative forms of expression. Poetry might become more symbolic and visual. Storytelling would rely on images and written narratives rather than spoken tradition. Speech itself would become sacred. A spoken sentence might be treated like a ritual or ceremony. Important moments, weddings, funerals, declarations, apologies, would revolve around carefully chosen words spoken at the right time. Language would likely evolve to become denser and more efficient. Single sentences might carry layered meanings, cultural references, and emotional depth far beyond modern speech. The psychological cost of silence. While some might find peace in reduced noise, many would struggle deeply. Silence can be isolating. Humans are social creatures, and verbal interaction helps regulate emotions and maintain mental health. The inability to speak freely could lead to feelings of invisibility and powerlessness. People might feel trapped inside their own minds, unable to release thoughts through voice. Over time, this could contribute to increased anxiety, depression, or emotional numbness. At the same time, some individuals might discover new forms of self-awareness. Without constant verbal expression, introspection could deepen. Listening, truly listening, might become a dominant skill. Would life become more meaningful? The most profound question is whether limiting speech would make life more meaningful or more oppressive. On one hand, words would carry extraordinary weight. People might speak with intention, kindness, and clarity. On the other hand, the loss of spontaneous communication could strip life of warmth, humor, and connection. Human history shows that expression is closely tied to freedom. Limiting speech, even equally for everyone, would reshape not just communication, but identity itself. Our voices are part of who we are. Conclusion. A world where you could only speak once per day would be quieter, but not necessarily calmer. Communication would become intentional, relationships would change, and society would reorganize around silence and scarcity. Speech would gain immense value, but its absence would leave emotional and psychological gaps that no system could fully replace. This thought experiment reveals just how central communication is to being human. It reminds us that words are not just tools. They are bridges between minds, hearts, and lives. If this idea made you pause and reconsider how often you speak and what you say, like, subscribe, and join us for more thought experiments that challenge the way we live, communicate, and understand ourselves.